Pastor Freeling said that Martin Luther Home was started by a penny postcard.
Those 4 people each put $1 in the collection plate to get it started.
These early founders were tremendously resourceful.
Where charity and love are, there God is, and there is joy.
In 1902, K.G. William Dahl immigrated from Sweden to the United States. He began working in the paper mills of Massachusetts and moved to the stone quarries of Connecticut. In the span of 10 years, he worked 2 jobs, finished college and seminary training, served 3 churches, and would soon become the founding father of Bethphage.
His name was K.G. William Dahl. His mother called him Willie all the time, Willie Dahl. He was called here to be the pastor of Bethphage Church in Axtell. It was a brand new congregation. He came for $1,200 a year. And then as soon as he got here, he said, "This is the place I want my mission."
1913. Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated the 28th president. The 16th Amendment was ratified, authorizing the income tax. Henry Ford began using an assembly line to build Model Ts. And on February 19, 1913, the Bethphage Intermission Association was formed.
It truly was a miracle to start this institution where they did, right out here in the middle of a prairie. It's known, of course, as the miracle of the prairies, and it certainly is a miracle.
It was designed primarily for people with epilepsy, but there were people that had mental retardation, had learning difficulties, or seizure disorders, and all other sorts of disorders. There were a number of people that really were there primarily because they were orphaned and there was nowhere else to go.
He was a man who really had a keen and very unique understanding of people with disabilities, coupled with compassion for their plight.
Well, all I can say is I wish I had known him. The only thing I can remember at all about him was that I used to ride on his shoulders, and he was tall. So when we came to a door, we had to duck.
I think one of his first projects was he wrote all of the Lutheran pastors. Then he'd send out little stamps. And he said, "There's 12 stamps. I'd like to have 10 cents a piece for each stamp." And so he got money that way. And then he developed the banks. And he took those to all of the schools around the area.
Just think about how it has grown.
We're serving 3,600 people, give or take, in 30 communities in the United States. We've got I think it's $180 million budget, somewhere in that figure. And we're in Latvia, Romania, Germany, Great Britain and part of Russia.
And it's still a miracle, I think.
1925, Calvin Coolidge was President of the United States. Benito Mussolini takes over dictatorial powers in Italy. Walter Chrysler founds the Chrysler Corporation. And on October 20th, 1925, the Martin Luther Home Society was formed. The founders were Reverend Julius Moll, Reverend William Freeling, Reverend August Hager, Mr. William Amen, and Mr. John Auden. They met in the library of the former Martin Luther Academy in Sterling, Nebraska. Their purpose was to lay plans for the founding of a home of Christian charity for mentally handicapped people. Richard Freeling, son of Reverend William Freeling, was there.
They were starting out from scratch, with scarcely any experience, with scarcely any facilities, with scarcely any resources of any kind. But they were, as I recall, led by the Spirit. They prayed about it, visited with one another. The need was there. What shall we do? Well, that was the beginning of a dream. These were dedicated Christian people who knew their scriptures and knew what it meant if your brother is in need, to take him in, to help him out.
Stories of survival during the Depression and the tough economic times were just, the performance of the people was simply heroic.
The Depression wouldn't have been so bad if it hadn't been for the hard times came right in the middle of it. And that was, among other things, the hard times included the drought of the 30s, where everybody was hurting.
Mother would be canning, and there were canning days that they had at Sterling, and they had their own garden, and they had their own cattle, chickens, hogs, cows, milk cows, beef cows, so that they were self-sufficient pretty much.
Gallons and gallons and gallons of tomatoes and beans and corn, everything. They did the canning operation down at one of the buildings, and it was maybe a 2 or 3 day project.
And then we would have Martin Luther Home Sunday on the first Sunday in June. And they would pitch a big tent in Sterling, and the congregations would gather there, and we'd just have a great time.
There were a lot of people who worked for practically nothing and who were really dedicated to the task that they were doing.
Bethphage has always had challenges, and of course the flow of funds during the Depression were really intense. And my dad went out to visit the different congregations, and it's always a little hard to ask for funds, but yet he saw such a need, and we believed that Bethphage was helping so many people that he was amazingly successful given the times.
One of the other things that I was very impressed with was the chapel building here. To see that building and then to know that it was built by the Women's Missionary Society of the Augustana Lutheran Church with pennies that they saved is a big thing to remember about dedication.
And that has always stuck in my mind as an example of what can be done when there is a real strong sense of intentionality to follow Christ's example of care for those who are in need.
Oh, I have wonderful memories as a child. We used to walk up from town on Sunday afternoons. I know Charlotte Engstrand was one of the first ones that I went in to see, because I always knew she had homemade fudge.
They used to have Saturday night band concerts down here in the park, and the community here from Bethphage would be down there, and they wouldn't be there as a separate group except for those that, you know, really needed help, but they were just part of the community.
I just think it's one wonderful program. I enjoy it. I enjoy it, and as I said, the one thing that impresses me the most is how much they care about the clients, about everybody.
And I can recall I met a guest, I forget the fellow's name, but he asked each of us what our birth date was and what year we were born. And he would tell us, you were born on a Thursday. I guess he was autistic, and I think he was right on with that.
I'll never forget meeting one person who came to Bethphage, the Axtell campus. Her parents placed her there because they believed that she would never be able to take care of herself. And then I think it was in Kearney, Nebraska, she stood before a group of Bethphage and made a speech. Now I think she lives in a supervised apartment, and I understand she's even made a contribution to the ministry of Bethphage. So, you know, some things like that's the legacy of really developing or giving people the opportunity to develop the potential that they have.
My earliest recollection of Bethphage is on a family trip. We were all loaded into the, what was it, 57 Packard, going down Highway 6 and past a little town called Axtell. And my dad said, there's Bethphage Mission over there. That's the Swedes. It's just like Martin Luther. And, wow, the Swedes have a place just like Martin Luther.
Martin Luther Home used to collect food and clothing all over the Midwest here, and probably the first thing that I ever done with them was my truck from the farm and went around in Kansas and Colorado and Nebraska, picking up from churches food and clothing and bring it back to Martin Luther Home.
The founders got together, decided to go away from a custodial care to making Martin Luther Home a school. And that's when the name was changed to Martin Luther Home and School. Martin Luther Home was the first agency that provided a school for these clients. And that's in the country. See, so we had some visionary people.
My first real summer job was in 1969, teaching in the school. It was the engineered classroom, which was kind of state-of-the-art then behaviorally. It was fun. There were other young people who were from other Lutheran churches who came to work at Martin Luther during the summer, and I recall having our first summer formal where we got a fountain that pumped real water from Earl Mays and brought it into the multi-purpose room and decorated, and the gals who were living there at the school went out and got formals, and they had their hair done in the morning, and the guys got into suits, and I remember the line shaving everybody up, and there was music, and we had a summer formal, and that was pretty hot stuff.
I think any discussion about the history of the organizations would not be complete if there was not some mention of the role that has been played by volunteers. And the leaders of those volunteers have been pastors and pastors' wives, and at Bethphage it was the diaconate. Were it not for those people, we wouldn't have Mosaic today. I remember these two organizations started in the teens and the 20s, and they made it for 50, 60 years before there was any real public assistance of any type to help support them. During all of those years, those good old days, they were tough. And if it were not for the commitment and the volunteerism and self-sacrifice and giving of those people, it just would not have happened.
My father thought it was a calling to serve at Bethphage, and it was what the Lord wanted him to do. So it was just he was in his right place where he had work to do.
I spoke to a few people who had been, in some cases, children of the original employees who worked at Martin Luther back in Sterling in the 20s and 30s. It was the total dedication that the people with disabilities deserve the very best in spite of limited resources.
The people who have made this organization are not those who've been able to sit in front of the lights. They're the ones who are doing the work. The direct care staff are the most respected of anybody in my book.
If I could choose one thing that people would remember about Martin Luther Home as I remember it as a youngster, it was dedication. There were just so many people who had singleness of mind and purpose and did what they did out of love.
The bottom line for us is always the people that we serve, the people that we work with. So if we can improve their quality of life, the quality of our service, then by joining hands, it really makes good sense.
The question was frequently asked of me after I arrived at Martin Luther Homes in 1990. How can it be that there are two national agencies of the Lutheran Church, same branch of the Lutheran Church, both specializing in developmental disability supports, based only 50 miles apart in Lincoln and in Omaha, and that you're two separate groups and not one?
As far as we can tell, in our records, the two organizations started talking about consolidation or merging back in the 1940s. It took a good 50, 60 years to get the decision made.
The consolidation of Martin Luther Homes and Bethphage has, in the formation of Mosaic, saved some millions of dollars by reducing the duplication of efforts in administration, in training, and in many, many other ways.
So I think the one thing to remember is that in spite of now having a product and a way of operating that looks so different from over 90 years ago, right at the very heart of it is mission. And that really has changed very, very little.
So many of the things that Bethphage and Martin Luther Home both did were steps of faith. I sometimes think about Indiana Jones, where he was told by his father to walk across this chasm as a step of faith, and he looked across this huge hole and there was nothing there, and yet he took a step. And there was a clear glass pathway that he couldn't see, and when he threw the sand on it, he recognized that it was there and he was able to move across it. So much of what the legacy organizations did, they couldn't see the path across that chasm. They just had to believe that there was a reason, in a way.
Mosaic's going to have a strong, bright future. It's the largest of the faith-based organizations that work with people who have disabilities in the country. Its reputation is sterling. We do have opportunity now to be at the table and visit with the government and regulators and others about how things are going.
But now for Mosaic, as there are leadership changes, a new frontier continues to be out there, and I have every assurance we're going to look back and see God's blessings on Mosaic as we've seen God's blessings on the two founding institutions.
What a magnificent heritage we have, and what really heroic folks have worked to bring Mosaic to where it is today. David Attenborough, in his life of Mother Teresa, he said, "There's a light in this world, a healing spirit that is stronger than any darkness we may encounter. We sometimes lose sight of it when there is suffering, too much pain. Then suddenly the spirit will emerge through the lives of ordinary people who hear a call and who answer in extraordinary ways."